Welcome to today's briefing on a pivotal moment in U.S.-Ukraine diplomacy. On October 17, 2025, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited the White House for the third time in just 8 months, marking an extraordinary period of high-stakes negotiation. While the world focuses on ongoing geopolitical tensions, energy security, and the broader Russia-Ukraine conflict, this meeting exemplifies how bilateral diplomacy, personal rapport, and strategic signaling converge in modern international relations. Let's take a moment to contextualize why this visit is important. The Russia-Ukraine war has stretched into multiple years, leading to significant loss of life, economic disruption, and global political instability. Western allies, led by the United States, have been providing military, economic, and humanitarian support to Ukraine. Against this backdrop, repeated high-level meetings signal that the U.S. remains engaged, not just in supplying weapons, but in shaping the conditions for a possible ceasefire and a negotiated settlement. President Trump's involvement, his third meeting with Zelensky within less than a year, underscores the ongoing U.S. commitment to influencing the outcome while simultaneously balancing domestic political priorities. This White House meeting is not only symbolic, it carries tangible implications. The discussions reportedly included ceasefire frameworks, weapons aid, and potential pathways to direct talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump's statements suggest cautious optimism. "We might already be quite close to peace," he remarked. Such statements serve multiple purposes. They signal to domestic audiences that the U.S. is pursuing peace, reassure Ukrainian leadership, and subtly communicate to Russia that high-level dialogue remains possible. At the same time, this meeting demonstrates the complex interplay between diplomacy, military strategy, and political messaging. It is also worth noting the informal elements of the visit. Trump's comment on Zelensky's stylish jacket might seem trivial, but it reflects a calculated approach in modern diplomacy, where personal rapport, charm, and gestures of goodwill can have substantive effects on negotiation dynamics. Leadership studies indicate that such small interpersonal cues can influence trust building, cooperation, and the willingness to engage in more substantive negotiations. From a strategic perspective, the meeting sets the stage for Trump's planned bilateral discussions with Putin in Hungary. By keeping Zelensky closely informed, the U.S. seeks to ensure that Ukraine feels included and supported, even if the direct negotiations with Russia take a separate path. This dual-track diplomacy is delicate. Missteps could either embolden Russia, alarm Ukraine, or provoke domestic criticism. Therefore, every statement, gesture, and reported action is being closely watched by diplomats, analysts, and markets alike. Finally, it is essential to appreciate the broader global context. Beyond the immediate U.S.-Ukraine-Russia triangle, the European Union, NATO allies, and regional actors like Turkey, Poland, and the UK have a vested interest in the outcome. Ceasefire talks, weapons deals, and bilateral engagement influence not only military operations on the ground, but also international energy security, economic sanctions regimes, and the strategic posture of NATO. In short, this White House meeting is not merely a bilateral encounter. It is a microcosm of 21st century geopolitics where diplomacy, military support, and political theater intertwine. Over the next slides, we will break down what transpired during this visit, analyze the weapons negotiations, explore the planned U.S.-Russia bilateral discussions, and evaluate the broader implications for Ukraine, the United States, and global stability. The goal is to provide a complete understanding of the significance of this meeting, both in the immediate context and in the long-term trajectory of the Ukraine conflict. Let's begin. On October 17, 2025, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived at the White House for the third time in just 8 months, underscoring the critical nature of the ongoing Ukraine conflict and the high level of U.S. engagement. This meeting was not just another routine diplomatic encounter. It was a highly strategic gathering designed to navigate a complex web of military, political, and economic considerations. The frequency of Zelensky's visits signals the urgency with which Kyiv seeks sustained international support, while simultaneously reflecting the United States' central role in shaping the trajectory of the peace process. From the very outset, the atmosphere of the meeting combined both formality and informality. President Trump began with a lighthearted comment on Zelensky's attire, remarking on his stylish jacket. While this might appear trivial at first glance, such gestures are strategically significant in high-stakes diplomacy. Personal rapport and informal engagement are critical in establishing trust, particularly in situations fraught with tension and high uncertainty. Research in negotiation and leadership indicates that small acts of camaraderie can reduce psychological barriers, encourage openness, and create a more conducive environment for substantive dialogue. In essence, the meeting began by setting a tone of cautious optimism and humanizing interactions, which can have downstream effects on the willingness to compromise or consider new proposals. The meeting's substantive agenda centered on exploring opportunities for progress in the Ukraine conflict, with a particular focus on ceasefire arrangements and military support. President Trump highlighted the potential for progress by stating, "We might already be quite close to peace." This statement served multiple purposes, signaling to domestic audiences that the United States is actively pursuing peace, reassuring allies in Europe and NATO of continued engagement, and communicating to Russia that the U.S. maintains influence and oversight in shaping the negotiation process. The phrasing is carefully calibrated to convey optimism without overpromising results, a critical balancing act given the complexities of the conflict and the high stakes for all parties involved. A major point of discussion involved the strategic planning for upcoming direct talks between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump confirmed that these talks are likely to occur in Hungary and will focus on a bilateral framework rather than a trilateral summit including Ukraine. He assured Zelensky that continuous communication would be maintained to ensure that Ukraine's security concerns are fully represented. This approach demonstrates a nuanced understanding of negotiation dynamics. Bilateral discussions allow each side to articulate positions freely, reducing the risk of posturing or escalation that might occur in a multilateral setting. Such a strategy also allows the U.S. to maintain maximum flexibility, balancing the interests of both Ukraine and Russia, while signaling commitment to peace. Weapons aid and military support were another critical component of the discussion. Zelensky proposed an exchange whereby Ukraine's drones would be traded for U.S. Tomahawk missiles, reflecting a calculated effort to enhance Ukraine's strategic capabilities. President Trump responded with careful consideration, noting that the U.S. must retain sufficient operational capacity for its own defense, while emphasizing the importance of avoiding unnecessary escalation. This discussion highlights the delicate interplay between providing meaningful assistance to Ukraine and managing the risks of broader confrontation. The exchange underscores that the peace process is not purely diplomatic, but deeply intertwined with military strategy and resource allocation. Security guarantees were also a central concern for Zelensky. He emphasized the need for robust assurances that Ukraine's sovereignty would be protected, ideally through formal NATO mechanisms or interim bilateral arrangements with the United States. Such guarantees are essential to any credible peace agreement, as they provide a framework for trust and compliance. Zelensky's request reflects the broader strategic necessity for Ukraine to maintain leverage in any negotiations while remaining open to compromise that might pave the way for a ceasefire or broader peace arrangement. In parallel, he proposed further cooperation on drones and long-range strike capabilities, reinforcing the message that military readiness remains a cornerstone of Ukraine's negotiation strategy. Beyond the immediate discussions, the meeting also served as a signal to the international community. U.S. engagement at this level reassures European partners, regional allies, and global observers that Washington remains central to resolving the conflict. At the same time, it demonstrates that U.S. diplomacy is actively balancing domestic political messaging, military commitments, and international credibility. Every public statement, whether optimistic, humorous, or cautionary, has ramifications for both allies and adversaries, influencing global market reactions, public opinion, and the dynamics of ongoing negotiations. The White House meeting also illustrates the fragility and complexity of modern diplomacy. While statements of optimism were exchanged, both leaders recognized the precarious nature of the peace process. Earlier communications between Trump and Putin set the stage for further bilateral talks, but the potential for sudden escalation, misinterpretation, or external interference remains significant. Zelensky's pragmatic stance that any form of dialogue, bilateral or trilateral, is acceptable as long as it advances peace, reflects a flexible approach designed to maximize opportunities for progress without compromising national security or operational readiness. Finally, the meeting is emblematic of 21st century diplomacy, where symbolism, strategy, and public narrative intersect. The careful orchestration of personal rapport, strategic discussion, military aid considerations, and public messaging reflects a highly sophisticated understanding of international relations. While media coverage often emphasizes optics, the underlying negotiations reveal intricate calculations, balancing immediate operational needs with long-term geopolitical strategy. This meeting, therefore, provides critical insight into how the United States navigates complex conflict scenarios, leveraging diplomacy, military influence, and strategic signaling to pursue stability in a turbulent global environment. One of the most consequential aspects of the ongoing diplomatic engagement surrounding the Ukraine conflict is the potential for direct talks between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Following the White House meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Trump confirmed his intention to meet with Putin in Hungary. This meeting is anticipated to be a bilateral dialogue rather than a trilateral summit that includes Ukraine directly. This distinction is important as it affects both the negotiation dynamics and the perceived legitimacy of outcomes on the international stage. The bilateral nature of the talks is designed to allow each country to articulate its position freely without immediate pressure from the other stakeholders. For the United States, this format provides an opportunity to exert influence over the negotiation agenda while managing sensitive security concerns raised by Ukraine. For Russia, it allows the Kremlin to frame discussions on its own terms and explore potential compromises without public scrutiny. From a strategic standpoint, bilateral meetings reduce the risk of overt confrontation during high-stakes negotiations and create a controlled environment for preliminary agreements or confidence-building measures. Trump has indicated that he will maintain close communication with Zelensky throughout this process. This approach is critical for ensuring that Ukraine's security concerns are represented and that any preliminary agreements do not disadvantage Kiev. The president emphasized the importance of maintaining open channels of dialogue, reflecting a nuanced understanding of modern diplomacy, where back-channel communications often play a decisive role in shaping outcomes. In essence, these direct talks with Putin do not replace consultations with Ukraine. Rather, they supplement them, aiming to synchronize objectives and maintain credibility with all parties involved. A central focus of the talks is the establishment of a durable peace framework that can accommodate the interests of both Ukraine and Russia while preventing further escalation. Trump has repeatedly stated that he believes peace might be achievable through separate, discrete discussions that allow each party to feel comfortable and respected. This approach underscores the delicate balancing act involved in international diplomacy, advancing negotiations without provoking unnecessary resistance or undermining the perception of fairness. In practice, achieving this balance requires careful messaging, strategic sequencing of proposals, and constant assessment of risks. The United States' strategic posture during these discussions also reflects the intersection of diplomacy and military considerations. Weapons aid, particularly the allocation of advanced systems such as Tomahawk missiles and long-range drones, remains a pivotal issue. Zelensky has proposed exchanges designed to enhance Ukraine's defensive and offensive capabilities, while Trump must weigh the need to support Ukraine with the imperative of maintaining the U.S. military's operational readiness. These considerations highlight the reality that peace negotiations are never purely political. They are intertwined with questions of force projection, deterrence, and strategic stability. Another critical dimension involves the signaling effect to the broader international community. By openly discussing direct talks with Russia, the U.S. sends multiple messages. To allies, it reassures them of Washington's engagement and commitment to regional stability. To adversaries, it signals readiness to negotiate seriously without capitulation. The careful calibration of these signals is essential to prevent misinterpretation, which could exacerbate tensions or lead to preemptive actions by third parties. Analysts note that the combination of direct dialogue, public statements, and back-channel coordination forms the backbone of contemporary diplomatic strategy. The historical context of U.S.-Russia negotiations also provides insight into the potential outcomes and challenges. Previous high-level interactions have demonstrated that personal rapport, timing, and sequencing of proposals often determine whether agreements are tentative, substantive, or symbolic. Trump's meeting with Putin must navigate this historical landscape, balancing the need for tangible progress with the imperative of maintaining credibility on the global stage. Missteps could lead to setbacks not only in Ukraine, but in other areas of geopolitical importance, including arms control, energy markets, and regional security alliances. Economic and political calculations further complicate the process. Domestic audiences in both countries are attentive to perceived concessions or failures, and media coverage amplifies every statement or action. Trump's emphasis on staying in touch with Zelensky is also intended to manage these domestic and international narratives, ensuring that both public perception and realpolitik considerations are aligned. Diplomacy in the modern era operates in this dual space, where communication, optics, and negotiation strategy are inseparable from substantive agreements. Finally, the planned bilateral discussions underscore the strategic role of the United States in shaping the peace process. By taking a direct, hands-on approach, Trump positions the U.S. as both mediator and principal actor. This engagement allows Washington to influence the trajectory of talks, promote security guarantees, and maintain leverage in the broader geopolitical context. At the same time, it reflects the limitations of multilateral approaches in fast-moving conflicts, where flexibility and discretion are often more effective than large-scale summits. In sum, these planned talks with Putin represent a critical opportunity for U.S. diplomacy to steer negotiations toward a potential resolution while managing risks associated with escalation, credibility, and alliance dynamics. One of the most sensitive aspects of the ongoing U.S.-Ukraine-Russia negotiations involves the discussion of Tomahawk missiles and their potential exchange for Ukrainian-made drones. During the White House meeting, President Zelensky proposed a trade in which Ukraine would provide advanced drones in exchange for U.S. Tomahawk missiles. This proposal is both tactical and symbolic, representing Ukraine's desire to enhance its offensive capabilities while signaling to the international community that it is actively contributing to its own defense. For the United States, however, the allocation of Tomahawk missiles is a high-stakes decision that must balance strategic support with national security interests. The Tomahawk missile is a long-range, precision-guided weapon with strategic implications that extend beyond battlefield effectiveness. Its deployment carries potential escalatory risks, particularly in conflicts involving major powers like Russia. Trump acknowledged these risks, noting that the U.S. military also needs to maintain operational reserves of these missiles to ensure deterrence and readiness. This dual consideration, supporting an ally while preserving U.S. strategic capabilities, underscores the complexity of modern arms assistance programs. The discussion of Tomahawk exchanges thus exemplifies the delicate calculus involved in military diplomacy, where every decision carries both immediate tactical impact and long-term geopolitical consequences. From a broader perspective, the negotiation highlights the intersection of diplomacy, military strategy, and political signaling. Zelensky's proposal reflects Ukraine's commitment to peace, but also its understanding that security guarantees cannot be symbolic. They must be backed by actionable resources. By negotiating the use and transfer of drones and missiles, Ukraine signals to Russia, the international community, and domestic audiences that it is an active participant in shaping the conflict's trajectory. Meanwhile, the U.S. must communicate that its support is substantial but measured, avoiding any perception of unconditional backing that could embolden risky military actions. One of the central themes of the White House meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky was the issue of security guarantees. Ukraine's leadership has consistently emphasized that any meaningful progress toward peace must be accompanied by concrete assurances that its sovereignty and territorial integrity will be protected. In this context, Zelensky stressed that while ceasefire agreements are a necessary starting point, they are insufficient without accompanying mechanisms to ensure long-term security. The discussion reflected both the urgency of ending hostilities and the deep complexities of negotiating guarantees acceptable to both Ukraine and its allies. President Zelensky's remarks highlighted the nuanced balance Ukraine seeks. On one hand, a bilateral or multilateral framework that strengthens its defense posture, and on the other, a willingness to engage in pragmatic negotiations with the United States as a primary partner. Specifically, he pointed out that while NATO membership remains a long-term strategic goal, immediate discussions should focus on achievable, enforceable commitments that can reduce the risk of further escalation. This reflects a realistic approach that acknowledges geopolitical constraints while still safeguarding national interests. Security guarantees, in this context, go beyond mere rhetoric. They encompass a variety of tangible measures, including access to defensive weaponry, intelligence sharing arrangements, training programs, and formalized commitments from allied nations to intervene in case of renewed aggression. Zelensky's emphasis on security guarantees indicates that Ukraine views these measures as essential preconditions for any ceasefire or peace agreement. Without such guarantees, Kyiv risks entering negotiations from a position of vulnerability, which could embolden adversaries or undermine domestic support for diplomatic efforts. In addition to formal guarantees, Zelensky underscored the importance of operational collaboration. He proposed enhanced cooperation in areas such as drone operations, long-range strike capabilities, and defensive technologies. These proposals are not merely tactical. They serve as both a deterrent to adversaries and a demonstration of Ukraine's commitment to responsible self-defense. By combining strategic guarantees with operational capabilities, Ukraine seeks to create a security framework that is credible, enforceable, and adaptable to evolving threats. The discussion also touched on the psychological and symbolic dimensions of security guarantees. For Ukraine, assurances from the United States carry significant weight, signaling international legitimacy and reinforcing domestic morale. Public perception is crucial. Citizens, military personnel, and allied observers must believe that any agreement provides real protection and is backed by credible enforcement mechanisms. Zelensky's insistence on clear, actionable guarantees reflects a recognition that vague promises or conditional commitments are insufficient in the high-stakes context of ongoing conflict. From a diplomatic perspective, these discussions demonstrate the importance of trust building. Security guarantees require mutual confidence that commitments will be honored, even in the face of political change or external pressure. The United States, in turn, must assess its ability to credibly deliver on such promises without overextending its resources or provoking unintended escalation. This interplay of trust, capability, and signaling is a hallmark of modern conflict resolution and highlights the delicate balance both leaders must maintain. Economic and logistical considerations also inform the debate over security guarantees. Providing military assistance, intelligence sharing, or operational training involves resource allocation, budgeting, and coordination with allies. These practical aspects cannot be overlooked as they determine the feasibility and sustainability of any guarantee. Zelensky's proposals implicitly recognize that guarantees must be supported by both political will and operational capacity to have real impact. Furthermore, The conversation reflects a broader strategic philosophy. Peace is not merely the absence of war, but the presence of credible security arrangements that prevent future conflict. By demanding clear guarantees, Zelensky aims to shift the focus from temporary ceasefires to long-term stability. This approach acknowledges that any peace agreement without enforceable protections is likely to be fragile and susceptible to breakdown under pressure. Finally, the discussion of security guarantees illustrates the interconnected nature of modern diplomacy, military strategy, and domestic politics. Zelensky's requests are carefully calibrated to address both immediate tactical needs and broader geopolitical concerns. They also serve a signaling function to Russia and other international actors. Ukraine is prepared to negotiate, but only from a position that ensures its survival and sovereignty. For the United States, supporting these guarantees reinforces its credibility as a global partner, demonstrates commitment to allied security, and maintains influence in a region critical to international stability. The overarching theme of this stage of the U.S.-Ukraine diplomatic process is the fragility and complexity of achieving a sustainable peace. While meetings between President Trump and President Zelensky have highlighted potential avenues for de-escalation, the path forward remains precarious. Both leaders acknowledge that any progress toward ending the conflict must contend with political, military, and psychological obstacles. The discussions in Washington underscored that peace is not merely a product of goodwill or high-level diplomacy. It requires a meticulously constructed framework that addresses the concerns of all stakeholders and ensures that commitments are credible and enforceable. Earlier in the week, President Trump reportedly held a lengthy phone call with President Putin ahead of the Budapest summit. This communication was framed as a preparatory dialogue, aiming to identify points of mutual interest and potential compromises before formal negotiations. While such contacts are essential for setting the tone and demonstrating intent, they also underscore the delicate nature of international diplomacy, where missteps or miscommunications can rapidly unravel progress. The strategic choice to hold a pre-summit conversation illustrates an understanding that peace efforts must be managed carefully, balancing transparency with discretion to avoid premature escalations or misinterpretations by third parties. Another layer of complexity arises from military realities on the ground. While both leaders have expressed optimism about potential breakthroughs, the ongoing conflict continues to produce casualties and political pressures. Weapons aid, troop movements, and territorial control remain fluid variables that can dramatically influence negotiation dynamics. For Ukraine, security guarantees are not abstract. They are essential for enabling political leaders to make concessions without risking national survival. Conversely, the U.S. must carefully manage its commitments to avoid entanglement in direct conflict while still supporting its ally effectively. The delicate interplay between military necessity and diplomatic flexibility underscores the fragility of the peace process. Economic and humanitarian considerations further complicate the path to peace. The prolonged conflict has strained Ukraine's infrastructure, disrupted supply chains, and created significant displacement among civilians. Trump and Zelensky reportedly discussed avenues to provide targeted economic aid and facilitate reconstruction planning, recognizing that long-term stability requires addressing the material and social consequences of war. Humanitarian assistance, investment in rebuilding, and support for displaced populations are not merely ethical imperatives. They are strategic tools that reinforce trust and create conditions conducive to sustained peace. Without these complementary measures, any ceasefire or agreement risks being short-lived and susceptible to renewed hostilities. Psychological and symbolic factors also play a pivotal role. For both leaders, public perception is critical. Trump seeks to demonstrate progress and reinforce his image as a deal-maker capable of brokering historic outcomes, while Zelensky must balance domestic expectations for security and sovereignty with the pressures of negotiating concessions.